Okay, so I just finished reading your papers on the special topics and I was quite pleased, and I thought that the information was interesting enough to recap your papers for your colleagues, um, because it's just a bunch of great examples for class, right? So that's what I'm going to do. The first one that I read was the Christmas trees. This I found really, really interesting. So there's apparently a shortage of Christmas trees, and there's various reasons for that. The price of substitutes has gone up, which is like the artificial trees, because of supply chain issues. A change in demand because we're staying at home more for Christmas, and now we're entertaining more this year, so we want even more trees. And then the most interesting part for me is the price elasticity of supply. I never have a good example for price elasticity of supply except for Christmas trees. Because if you think, okay, the price of Christmas trees is up this year, sweet, I'm going to plant a bunch. You have to wait 7 years to get the trees, right? So what's happened is because we're like suffering from what happened 7 years ago. Really interesting. If I was teaching micro, I'd probably put this on my final. Okay, electric cars. So Adam covered this. As we all kind of can see in the news, these are relatively COVID resistant. The one thing that I found particularly interesting, besides the increase, like I think they tripled from 2016 to 2020, is that a lot of governments are taking the COVID stimulus funds and putting them toward electric vehicle incentives. So we're going to see huge increase in electric cars. Brian covered housing. I think he did a really nice job. The question with housing, and I think I mentioned this, is whether there's a bubble, and there's really not a lot of evidence there is. There's a lot of reasons the demand for housing is up, but one thing Brian pointed out is the supply of housing is down, and one of the reasons is this is because inventory is so low, right? So if I was going to sell my house, I would be hesitant to do so because I'd be like, where would I live, right? Like, what would I buy? So that was interesting. Airlines and airports. Joe did this. There's going to be a permanent drop in business travel. I think it's going to go down to 80% of where it was, which makes sense, right? People are working from home. And it's also like, why would I travel if I don't have to? Because I can just have a Zoom meeting. And the other thing that's interesting about airlines, I had just assumed the supply was too high. So, like, airlines keep getting optimistic and they're like, we're going to add more flights. And then what happens is the demand doesn't follow, and so they just cancel them. Like, I don't know if this has happened to anyone you know where they just cancel flights. But it's also could be the other way. So they could like undershoot supply and then prices will be high in the short run. Either way, it's going to be volatile for a while. Jeff covered automobiles. I guess this chip shortage is going to be through 2023. And the most interesting thing in Jeff's analysis was the fact that they're making cars with everything but the chips, because that's the shortage, and they just have them parked like in parking lots. So Jeff's question is, what are they going to do with these chipless cars when the new models come out, right? Like, it's going to be a 2021 make, and then it'll be like 2023, right? So what are you going to do with them? Really interesting. Lydia covered smartphones. One thing I hadn't thought about the smartphone market, but demand is down because of uncertainty. So if you think about smartphones, it's not something that we need them, obviously, right? We're addicted to them, but you don't need an upgrade. So if you're uncertain about the future of your job, that's something you can cut out, is like upgrading to the latest iPhone. And then, of course, supply is down because of, again, supply chain issues. Jared talked about movies, and obviously theaters are down. Streaming services are the winners. I was quite interested. He found an analysis that predicted the independent theaters are going to be the ones that survive. So I was just in Milwaukee, and there was this, I don't know what it was called, some theater, and they were playing the Polar Express, right? It was a small independent theater in this funky neighborhood. That might survive because they have the power to play whatever they want, and they can offer added services maybe. So I hope that's true. I like those theaters. And then Jessica talked about healthcare, and this is really interesting because I think a lot of people assume healthcare was the winner, but actually hospital systems are down. And actually, like primary care visits are down as well. So that's one thing my husband works on. He's a designer. So he works with like Rush in Chicago, and they're trying to convince people to go to the doctor again because they're suffering. But one thing Jessica pointed out is that hospitals were doing poorly before the pandemic. So they suffered a lot because they were already in a bad position. And I told Jessica, my sister's a nurse, and she always says the only profitable parts of hospitals are orthopedic surgery and labor and delivery. And that's because it's young people without Medicare who go and get these things. So if you imagine you're not doing well before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hits, it's crazy. And Jessica also shared some costs of COVID patients. Gosh, it was so much money. It was like $22,000 to like 80 or something like that, which is just crazy how much this pandemic's costing us. And then, of course, we all know healthcare costs are increasing. So the reason I recorded this today as the sun is going down is because I'm going to forget the statistics, like 80% of business travelers is going to be what we return to. Feel free to reach out to me if you want to read someone's paper, or just reach out directly to them. Some really great sources. I was quite pleased with how you guys did. I will record your price discrimination lecture probably tomorrow. No one had any other preference besides that, so that's what we're doing.